a client with a rework department. It was a financial services firm, and they wanted me and our team to help them make it more efficient. They wanted to do the rework faster. So I told my client this story, and I could see that light bulb go off like, oh, right. We're just getting good at something we probably shouldn't be doing. And, that detracts from satisfying work, right? Are we just getting people in some do loop because we haven't figured out how not to do that?
Welcome to Work Matters, where we explore what leaders can do to make work more productive, valuable, meaningful, and impactful. I am your host, Thomas Bertels. Our topic today is how to become a better leader, and my guest is Elisabeth Swan. Elisabeth is an experienced process improvement consultant and change leader with over 30 years' experience. PEX Network has named her as one of the top 50 operational excellence thought leaders. She's the co-host of the popular Just-in-Time Café podcast and the author of 2 books, Picture Yourself a Leader and The Problem Solver's Toolkit. In today's discussion, we explore how executives can build their own leadership capacity. What are the leadership principles that help people effectively manage change within organizations? What are the behaviors and attitudes that leaders can embrace to improve work? What is the role of automation in change management? And how can process improvement ease the pain points and contribute to more lasting success? Elisabeth, welcome to the Work Matters podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Thomas.
I've been enjoying your latest book, Picture Yourself a Leader. For our listeners and viewers, here's a copy. And I really love it. I think it's an excellent book. Could you tell us a little bit about this book? What is it about and what prompted you to write it?
I guess in one word, COVID. I think about, I was a road warrior like you, and COVID took us off the road and gave us all time to think. What we did with our time was, kind of up to us. But I've got, 30 plus years in the business and have been a consultant, a coach, an instructor, designer. And, I've learned over the years. And I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to share, right? I've learned this stuff. I've been successful. Why not let others know, what helped me get where I am? So I started writing stories. You probably do the same thing. I use stories to teach. I use them to, influence, to connect with other people. And my chosen venue, kind of a good workplace venue, I think, is LinkedIn, right? So I chose, well, I'm gonna post my stories there. And I realized a lot of what I was posting was things like times that I had made a mistake, or I'd been involved in someone else making a mistake. And, I was putting those out there and then saying, because of that, right, I learned to do this, right? And then I'd ask people in our community and say, what did you do in this situation? People I knew, people I didn't know, I just put it out there. And people chimed in, right? There were conversations. Some of them got extensive. Some of them, really hit nerves. And when I looked at what people said and they gave their own stories, or they gave examples, or they gave a tip, or they gave a book that they enjoyed, and I learned even more. And the other thing I did involved in this, as you know, was I would post an illustration that captured the story that I was putting out there. And my family is full of full-on professional sculptors, painters, ceramic artists. I am a bit player, but I do like drawing. So I drew the people and the situations that I was describing, and it was a process, sort of get the essence of the issue and the emotion of the issue, right? And I find a lot of corporate, clip art, graphics, whatever. Graphics are actually, you can get more sophisticated ones, but often they don't include a face or eyes or expressions. And I wanted to show, fear, frustration, excitement, all the things that are part of work that maybe we don't discuss those things, but they're there. And when we don't acknowledge them, workplace suffers. So that's kind of what what sparked me, and what the book kind of contains, those lessons, those things I wanted to share.
It says in the cover, right? Illustrated micro lessons for navigating change. And one thing I really love about the book is the format, right? You got 50 chapters. Each one is only 4 or 5, right, pages long, including, right, your drawings. Each one has a memorable story from your own experience. You have a section on the wisdom of the crowd, which I guess is like the, right, incorporating the commentary you got on LinkedIn. So I think it's very digestible. I found myself, as I read through the book, making notes and connecting with it. So I can really highly recommend it. What are some of your favorite chapters in the book, and why those?
Oh, that's a hard question. But um, I will say I've heard, I didn't think about that at the time, but the format caused them to be bite-sized nuggets, like you're saying. I even had one person say they really appreciate the book because it's good for people with ADHD. They can just pick it up, read it for 5 minutes, and get something, right? And but if I had to pick a couple of favorites, I'd say one of them was a story. It comes from a chapter. It's called "Remove Blame from the Room," and this was a case where I was running a simulation up in Canada. You and I are both familiar with running simulations, Thomas. And there's moving parts. There's a lot of pieces to the sim, and we're in a offsite location where there were no people. It wasn't the company's home base. It was a place they could use with a room big enough to run a simulation with 25 people, a business simulation. And when I opened the box and I went to put, pencils next to each person's station because they'd be writing, the pencils weren't sharpened. And I thought, oh, okay, so what do we do now? And I checked, what were there other implements? They couldn't find things. People didn't necessarily bring their own writing implements. Then they kind of hunted in some of the empty offices, and it took us about a half an hour. Somebody finally found a sharpener. The client sat there sharpening pencils very kindly for me, and I was irritated, but we got it going. And I just thought, okay, so we'll have a postmortem back in the office. I'll find out, what went wrong. So I came back and we were having a team meeting, and it was a young guy that had packed the box. He was new, and he's just wanted to. He was just, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I heard the pencils were sharpened. I'm so sorry I didn't sharpen those pencils, and I'll never do that again. And I said, and I thought to myself, well, why were they unsharpened? I said, can you locate the instructions you were working from? Because clearly you're grabbing supplies that we had for you. Like, look at the instructions and tell me, what does it say? And it says, oh, it just says pack enough pencils for the people there. And I said, okay, does it say sharpened pencils or sharpen the pencils before you put them in? He's like, no. I said, okay, so you were given unsharpened pencils and you packed, you did what you were told. So that's on us. That's on us. We got to fix that. And we got to, buy pre-sharpened pencils. I can't imagine why there's still unsharpened pencils out there, but, and also put that in instructions. And I remember him saying, oh, that's a really interesting way to look at this. And I thought, oh, because blame is the norm, right? That's what we do. That's how we operate. Who's the guilty party, and go after it. So, that stuck with me. And I thought, oh, I've got to be mindful in my position as, whatever leader I am to whomever, to figure out what's it's kind of in our, the process improvement world. It's the process, not the people. Obviously people have something to do with it. But anyway, that was one of my favorite stories. And another one, and this one, the chapter is called Do It Right, Don't Do It Over. And this one happened when I was driving with my husband to Harvard Square. We were going to the Harvard ART, which is where all their plays are. That's an art center, I guess. And also our Think Center, American Repertory Theater. Anyway, we were going there. Parking is tough, as you would imagine in Harvard Square. And we got a spot. We raced in. And I was concerned because if you arrive after the curtain rises, then, they're not going to let you in right away because you'll be interrupting the show. And we got in there in time, and we got to the desk, and the woman looked at us, and I said, we're here. Here's our tickets. And she immediately handed me this sheet of paper, and it had a map of Harvard Square with a yellow highlighted path through it. She had a stack of them, and she gave that to me, and she said, the play is at One Arrow Theater. I said, great, where is that? She said, One Arrow Street. I said, oh, wonderful. And she said, this is how you get there. So we grabbed the sheet, raced across Harvard Square, found the theater, got in there, looking a little more disheveled. And the first thing I saw was a line of people. And they all seemed to be holding the same sheet that we had, right? With the yellow line through it. And she said, oh, go ahead, stand over here, right in this line. And in about 5 minutes, there's a lights out moment in the play. We will escort you to the front row. We have seats enough for you. And, you all sit down, and then, you'll be all set. And I thought, wow, this has happened before. And they're really good at this. Like, they know exactly what to do because a lot of people are going to the wrong theater. And, I know if I looked at root cause, it would be the way the email of the tickets looked and where your eyes went. But, it just, to me, that's one of these stories. And while it was happening, I thought, oh, yeah, this is a great story. I'll use this when I'm teaching about rework because, I had a client with a rework department. It was a financial services firm. And they wanted me and our team to help them make it more efficient. They wanted to do the rework faster. So I told my client this story, and I could see that light bulb go off like, oh, right. We're just getting good at something we probably shouldn't be doing. And, that detracts from satisfying work, right? Are we just getting people in some do loop because we haven't figured out how not to do that? And so that really stuck with me. So those are my two faves, Thomas.
Like you and I, we both have spent many, many years, right, working with organizations from really, really large to, probably something smaller, improve their processes, right? And there's no shortage of methods and principles for doing that, right? Lean, I think, offers a great set. So your book is really about what leaders can do to improve their own capabilities. And tell us maybe a little bit about those 5 principles that you use to organize the book, right? That really carries like the key theme through. What are those 5 principles?
So yeah, principles, tenets, and these work for all leaders, sort of regardless of whether they're engaged in process improvement or lean or Six Sigma or whatever. But the first one is consider your actions. The second is speak thoughtfully. The third is adapt your routines. Fourth is expand your reach. Fifth is treat people with respect. And lastly, respect yourself. So let me break those down. So consider your actions means basically what are the things that you can do to encourage others, down a good road, right? So like what I just described, not blaming people, not assuming your way is the only way or the right way necessarily, questioning rework like the one I just described, being mindful that whatever you do, you're modeling for others, right? Other people are watching you. So you're often unaware that people are following your lead. If you think about it, if you have kids, you realize it when they start repeating, common phrases you use. And hopefully they're saying things that's okay to repeat. But, that's the same thing happens with those you work with. Are you doing things you want them to do, right? So that one is consider your actions. The next one, tenet, is speak thoughtfully. So this deals with common traps we fall into around listening, conflict, not including others or the right others, giving people feedback when they have zero interest in hearing it. Lots of stories in there about, getting along with others, what goes into it. Also, just literally speech, right? Speak thoughtfully. I find that, jargon and acronyms have an impact on people in the workplace. If you're not absolutely certain they know what you're talking about, like, the Israeli army, everyone has to learn a set of acronyms, right? And that is absolutely critical for safety and saving lives. And the same with hospitals, right? There's acronyms people have to learn. Again, you're saving lives. But in organizations, we form jargon, we form acronyms, process improvement world has a ton of them. But it's a specialized language. And that's kind of helps us or causes, it's part of separating into silos, right? People are tribal, silos are tribes. Using special words and acronyms creates kind of in crowds and out crowds. And something happens once you know a term, you kind of assume everybody knows it. So it's insidious. You don't really think about it, and they form maybe internal wiki pages or some people just, if they're talking, they'll have a flip chart if they use a term, and they'll ask people, if you don't know it, let me know so we can do some definitions as we go. But speak thoughtfully is covering just all those aspects of, how we speak to others. The third tenet is adapt your routines, and that's kind of rich with stories about forming simple habits that help you and others get more out of a workday, right? So one of them might be things like define your boundaries, right? Which is incredibly topical because of the rise of work from home options, the fact that people are expected to be sometimes on like 24/7. How do you create meaningful boundaries? What hours are you available? How fast are you going to respond to emails? Or emails themselves, emails are kind of a rabbit hole. So, how are you planning your workday? Are you spending kind of your prime mental energy moments on just working through emails? Some folks have figured out, I got to turn it off for hours to be able to focus, and come back to it. So just that whole idea that your time is an asset. How are you spending it to your advantage? There's tons of great books out there on how to form good habits, but what habits should you be forming, right? So that's adapting your routines. The fourth one is expand your reach. And this is about getting more out of yourself, like using neuroscience discoveries to, tap your best ideas, things like that, or not letting perfect be the enemy of good. And, like, I'll ask you this, Thomas, where are you? What are you doing when you get your best ideas?
It's either in the shower, or it's sitting on the back patio.
So the neuroscience behind that is that when you're doing something rote, physical, right? Washing the dishes, taking a shower, driving the car, walking the dog, it puts your brain into theta waves. And that's where you get your ideal idea flow. So I do this. I used to, when I would teach this to groups or just be talking about brainstorming, and I'd ask them and they'd all give me all those answers, right? Or maybe right before you fall asleep or right when you wake up, that's also theta waves. And nobody would say at my desk, in a conference room, with the team, so it isn't happening at work. So thinking about, there's a reason why that happens, so we should take advantage of that, right? And for ourselves, if we're problem solving with other people, like keeping that in mind. So things like that, expanding your reach in terms of your idea flow. Another one aspect of that is, the way you're creating job aids, or you're writing up notes for people at work, or creating a manual, whatever you're doing. Hemingway has a quote that I live by, and I hope it's okay to say this on your podcast, but it's your first draft is shit. So that frees you up to do great work, right? If you just say, well, let me just get this first draft out, then I can come back and work on it. So I think that things like that help you get more out of yourself. All right, the fifth one is treat people with respect. And this tenet is about the fact that good leadership involves forming good relationships. And, you and I, big fans of like Edgar Schein, who I know that was a big part of humble leadership, humble inquiry, but it involves things like giving people credit, right? Credit's free. It's so easy to give people credit, give them, thank them. It's often a bigger motivator than money. Or another piece of that might be something I call returning authority, right? Should you be owning all the things that you do? Is there someone else who could benefit from taking that on, even if they won't, God forbid, do it as well as you at first? So treating people with respect involves all those things, right? Giving them responsibility, passing that off truly, not sort of looking over their shoulder, but letting them take something on. And the last one is respect yourself. And this final tenet covers things like, taking your own advice. We're often more helpful to other people than we are to ourselves. So things like not always asking permission, taking risks, not sticking with a position in a career or a job that no longer works, staying flexible. We're all, whether we, think of ourselves as improvisers or not, we do have to improvise. So you might as well be good at that, staying flexible. So those are the 6 tenets of the book, the 6 different sort of parts and chapters.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's an incredible resource, I think, for leaders, right? And it reminds me of a little bit, it's like when you get on an airplane, right? It's like put on your oxygen mask first. So you can't really help others, right, unless you yourself are in a good spot. And I think this book provides, I think, a ton of really good practical advice, right? It doesn't require people, I think, to be a different version of themselves, right? But I think it really, I think, allows people to tap into, I think, a lot of good wisdom that you accumulated over the years. So I applaud you for that. Maybe a slight change of topic. I'd love to get your perspective on what leaders can do to improve the work experience of the people that they're leading. Right? So it's one thing to work on yourself and be the most effective leader you can be, but I think you also have this responsibility, as you said, right, for the people that you're leading. What do you see as their role? What can they do? What are the opportunities that people often miss to make work better for others?
So there's a few simple things that I think make a huge difference. And one thing is clarity. And I find that you cannot hammer things too many times. You can't say them too often. Just this effort to make sure people know exactly what you expect, right? Show them. And I think that is something that people miss. There's a lot of unspoken expectations, assumptions, and disappointments happening because people didn't know. And when people don't do exactly what you expect, to get curious, right? As to why. What did they think you meant? Why do they think it either, didn't work or it isn't up to par? Then ask, right? So that being curious, starting there when things don't go as planned, don't immediately sort of go, that's not what I wanted. Also, this ability to be open to other, possibly better ideas, right? People closest to the work probably have improvement ideas. I go into this little French bakery in town, and I live in a tiny town, 30,000 people. I don't know how we scored a French bakery of this caliber. It is easily something I could walk through in Paris. But it's designed so horrendously that everyone I know, we all talk about it. Like we know going in there means you're at least got a half an hour of figuring out where the line goes, how to get in it, how to get out of it, to go see what's in the case, It's just, it's kludgy. And I remember walking up to the counter early on, and I said to the person at the cash register, I said, I bet you've redesigned this place in your head. And she said, 100 times. And I just think that is just such a great thing. And I know that people who are, closest to it, they've got some great ideas. And that means the last piece is you've got to listen, right? So there's a colleague of ours, John Gasperi, who has one of my favorite quotes. He says, the opposite of talking isn't listening, it's waiting to talk. And that is just this truism that we all live with. And that's also neuroscience, right? That is the fact that we speak at 150 words per minute, but we can process at 400 to 600 words a minute. So there's a gap, right? And what do we do with that gap? We might be thinking about what we're going to say, forming our sentences, thinking about whether we let the dog out, turn the oven off, like whatever. We've got a gap of time. So how do we use that? And it takes discipline to use that to actually focus on that person and what they're saying. So, some people count to 10, some people write things down, whatever it takes. But that's the last piece of this, which is listen. So those are kind of my high levels things that I think make a big difference for leaders to improve working experiences for others.
I think there's also a lack of knowledge, right? I'm always wondering kind of like why people are not, why leaders are not more active in fixing work, right? They clearly see that this is not as effective as it could be, right? They see the lines of people in the bakery. And I'm wondering, is it like a lack of knowledge, right? I just don't know what better could look like. Is it a lack of empathy, right? Yes, I see that, that right, people get frustrated, but I just don't think it's my job to fix it, right? Is it a lack of confidence and having the skills that to go there? What do you think it is? I mean, you also have seen plenty of bad processes, right? And I guess many leaders stepping back and really ignoring it, I think, for the most part, right? What's driving that?
I think you kind of hit on it. They're ignoring it because they're used to it. And there's something about the familiarity that drops people's interest. It's not new. It's the way things have been happening. It's like you see people's mission statements on walls and they're curling and cracked and yellowed. And you think, nobody's looking at that. And it's the same thing with a process that's not going well. It's what I described before. They might even be, getting good at the way it is, even though it's full of rework and not, and causing pain. So I think it's that familiarity that you have to actively step back as if you were new and look at a place with outsiders' eyes. In fact, maybe invite someone to say, come look at this. And that just doesn't happen unless you make it an intent. Because there's plenty of things that are on your plate, right? You could be busy all day, right? People are 99% busy. So it's a case of having that be you being mindful of it and wanting to look at why are we doing something this way.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that comes to mind is there's probably also just the resistance to change or the hesitation to change how the work gets done. And building a better organization really requires, I think, oftentimes, right, to take a hard look at what we do and find a better way of doing things. Managing change, what kind of advice would you give leaders to do that? And I know there's a story in your book, at least one story in your book to do that.
First off, always being clear on why. Why is the change happening? And this one, I was working with a small nonprofit in near me, and it was a daycare center or series of daycare centers, and the leadership wanted all of the people in her administration to become lean green belts, lean Six Sigma green belts, and really trained at process improvement. And she wanted them all to tackle projects as part of this, which I thought was fantastic. I coached them all, and the office manager had chosen to tackle the supply buying process. And she was new, and she was looking at all of the different buildings, and she saw they had dishwashers, they had plates, they had silverware, and they were still buying plastic and paper plates and all that. And so, and also she said she said the process was buy as you wish, right? People, teachers and admin would just buy what they needed when they needed it, and then she would just get the bills, right? Because they'd maybe use the corporate credit card. So she said, okay, we're gonna reduce the cost, and we're gonna change this process. So she immediately she had suppliers, and they were using dozens of suppliers. There was no one supplier, but she said, well, what if we could maybe consolidate? So she found this one supplier, and she ordered a new cleanser to use at the different centers. And she brought it to a meeting, and she said, here's the new cleanser I want to use. And they all went, I don't like the smell. This is going to irritate my skin. Why are we changing things like this and she realized, oh, this isn't going to happen easily. So she went to the CEO and she said, hey, can you help me basically with this? I don't think anyone is interested in changing the supply process or the buying process. She was getting a lot of pushback. And the CEO said, absolutely, you have my full support. Let me know. Who do you want me to speak to? And then she thought about it, and she thought, well, now I'm just pushing people, and I'm using, someone else with positional authority to push through this change. And that's just not how I pictured this. So, I was coaching her, and the next time I got, she told me what she was up against. And then next time I saw her, she was all smiles. And I said, what's going on? She goes, I had a new idea. And I realized if we could cut, I think it was $1,500 a month off the expenses, we could afford the mortgage on a new building for as part of the vision of the place. They wanted to get a new building, for a new daycare center. So once she put that out to people, like if we can, get some savings on consolidation, look for other savings and everybody jumped on board. They were like, oh, absolutely. That's what we need. We need the daycare center. It's going to help kids. These are all kids from needy populations. And it was like automatic. And then people started coming to her saying, you know what? There's these things we're using, these Verizon phone sticks. Nobody's using them. We should probably all pass those in. Or I have a home phone. I'm using my own cell phone. I don't really need a business one. So they made the savings really quickly. They were able to give people bonuses for the first time in the 50-year history of the company. They were able to give raises, and they got the new facility. So just being clear on why. And that seems kind of simple, but some people just skip it and start talking about, we got to reduce expenses, people. And nobody gets excited about reduction, right? Reducing your way to greatness is not one of the more exciting things to do. So things like that, why it's happening. The other one is to err on the side of inclusion. And this is something I see a lot when, you're managing change and you neglected a person, a group, a department. And this happens on large and small scales. I was working with a huge hospital system, and the group of nurses I was working with completely did a 5S, which is a workplace organization technique for anyone listening. And they did it on the nursing station, right? So to really make it clear where the patient information was, make it easy to get things, put things that they used a lot at waist height, put things they didn't use it often into cabinets, and they were so proud of it. And when the night shift came in, they put it all back to the way it was. And they were confused. They were definitely, took it as a setback. They were insulted, but it really came down to inclusion. If they had just included those folks, pulled them in, helped them understand why they were doing it, and included them in it. So that's a big one. And then another one is back to really getting to know, and I think you mentioned this, like having that curiosity, going to where people are working and understand what they do and what's happening for them, and ask questions, but also doing it with respect, right? And that means watching, listening. It means not calling people out like, oh, I thought we were supposed to be doing this, right? You're really just being a student of the process. And I think that's something that leadership benefits by, really going and trying to understand what other people do so that they can see what you were talking about before, like things could work better, right? I was working with a leader of a group who was providing phones and computer, all pieces of technology to the hospital system. And then on the weekends, he would just candy stripe and go and volunteer at the emergency room. And he was watching the ER nurse switch between a program that helped her do triage, right? So she's tracking who's coming in and severity. And then she would switch over to see what the cleaning services had made available in terms of rooms, so she knew when she could admit people. But he saw that she would often miss that beds had become available, and she could have admitted someone, earlier, or she got stuck, on the bedside and was missing what was happening in terms of triage. So he just went and got her a second monitor, right? But just by watching her work, he was like, oh, this is easy. She doesn't have to switch between apps. She can have both monitors up at the same time. She needs to see these things quickly back and forth. So just by going and watching and listening and asking, that's the other side, back to that quote about listening. If you ask those questions, then the flip side is spending that time listening. So those things are pivotal. So I think those, to me, make a huge difference in managing, navigating change.
It reminded me of a project we just finished up that really got triggered by, right, this organization had grown from 200 people to 1,000 people, and so the old workflows did not work at all, right, in this new context, and so the CEO and the president basically talked to 300-400 people, right, and spent like a half an hour with each of them to understand, right, what's going well, what's not going well, right, and I thought that was tremendous, and you rarely see that, right, and I think that's like an example of you really got to walk that extra mile and not rely on what you think the work is, right? Because it's probably been 20 years since you've done the work, if you ever did it, right? But actually, right, Gemba, right? Go to Gemba, go look and see, and that's oftentimes so eye-opening, right? That it actually, right, energizes leaders to do something about it, right? Once you look the problem in the eye, right, it's kind of hard to turn away from that and say, yeah, well, I guess we don't need to fix that, right? So I think you're absolutely spot on there. I have a slight detour. So, right, you and I, we started doing process improvement a while back, right, and had the privilege of working with a lot of organizations over the last couple of decades, and since I think the 90s, right, technology has become really pervasive in the workplace, and I'd be curious in two topics. One, do we even need to worry about business process improvement anymore? We can just automate it, right? We put some robots in there, and right. So why fix the process if we can just automate it away, right? Question one. Question number two is, my sense is that technology is like the new kind of like property plants equipment. In other words, you put these systems in, they're quite sticky, right? It's really hard to rip them out, right? And so, right, when, I don't know, right, 20 years ago, you could say, oh, this process is broken, let's fix the form, right? And you could print a new form, and you had a new form, and you had a new process. Now it oftentimes really requires like, extensive system changes, right? And fixes, and oftentimes, right? Those things don't get fixed because the money ran out on the project, but there's still so much technical debt. So I'd be curious, like, is this process improvement still relevant, and are, is technology, it's like helping or hindering in terms of getting better performance out of an organization?
Oh man, such good questions. And if impacting two clients I'm working with right now. So I'm working with um, UC San Diego Health. So coaching folks in process improvement there. And you've probably seen this 100 times, but people will show up and I'll say, what's the problem? And they'll say, lack of automation. And I'll say, but what's the problem? Like, what's happening that you think automation is going to solve that? And it's always I try to meet them where they are. It's a little bit of tug because they look at me like I've, three heads. It's like, what do you mean? It's just not automated. And I try to get at, what is it, what is happening right now? And then, we've got months together. We, eventually get them to sort of say what that automation was going to solve, and then sort of have them dig into it a little bit of, why is it set up the way it is? And 9 times out of 10, they come back and they kind of have this, one guy said to me, you know what, I know I'm going to come into the next process and say, we should just automate this. But I have to say, by resisting that initial like knee jerk, just put this, their system is called Epic, just, put this in Epic. He's like, I'm so glad we cleaned that up before we automated it. I wouldn't have done that. I would not have questioned all the steps that we were doing if we just, if you'd allowed us to go straight into what we wanted to do. And another nurse I was talking to, because they want to, whatever automation means, you're not necessarily first in line with IT, right? And they end up with this laundry list of things people want to change. So you might be, and I see people getting bumped down the list so that, months later they're like, well, I'm still waiting for that to come through. And I'm like, so now I just warn them. I'm like, and it's just for their own preservation. I say, if you want to graduate with this class, right? Because I'm teaching them and I want to help them, become official problem solvers, become green belts, lean Six Sigma green belts, or lean green belts, they actually call themselves. Anyway, if you want to graduate, you're going to have to try something, right? You've got to get through at least one improvement cycle. So don't put all your money on automation, because things can go wrong, right? You might not be able to get anything done. So what could you do in the meantime? And that's when they get really curious. And I had one nurse who, it was the rental of breast pumps. And she said, there was just this very fraught process. It took a long time, lots of rework. And she knew that automating it having it online would be much better. I said, great. And then, then she came to the realization that was going to happen for a while. And I said, well, what else could you do? Is there something you have control over? She goes, well, I said, do you know where the big bottleneck is? She goes, oh yeah, it's the credit card information. I said, okay. So what could you do? She goes, oh, well, I could take the stack that's in the gift shop of all the applications, and I can just highlight what I need from them that they constantly don't put in there. And I said, well, go for it, right? It's an easy fix or experiment. And she did it, and it made a big impact, and she could, talk about that. And then it also altered her request of IT. She realized a few other things that she wanted to change in terms of what she wanted to go online. So that made a huge difference. So that's kind of the process I go through with folks that, come in thinking, well, lack of automation, right? You should just automate. So the other piece you just asked for, which is the systemic enterprise systems we have in organizations right now. I'm dealing with a state, a Department of Transportation. They have an aging mainframe, and they're trying to see what are all the other states doing to basically register and document the leasing of big trucks, right? Interstate, intrastate, all that. So it's really complicated. It touches the feds. It touches, all these different places. And the technology is just daunting, right? How do you transition? How do you make that happen? So you had a good word for it. You called it sticky, right? That these things become really entrenched and hard to alter. And so, we see it happening. I think that's one of, Twitter's issue, right? They've got really, things are hinging on old technology that's kind of been patched, and that's what happens. And technology's all getting old, right? I mean, the minute it comes out, it starts to age. So we're all at different stages. So this idea that we're going to get to some place where these transitions and the stickiness isn't going to be a constant challenge. I don't know. Where do you stand with it?
It's a really tricky thing, right? Because obviously technology is here to stay. But I feel like I think people always think that it's a silver bullet. It's like you buy these scratch lotto tickets, right? We know that 75% of all system implementations fail to deliver any impact. But for some reason we think, right, we're going to have a winner and we're going to have one of the 25%. So that's kind of like all the games we know, right? We buy another lottery ticket. Every year we wonder why the price has gone up. That's one piece, right? I think the other piece is I find it hard to see how all these investments in systems like ERP systems or CRM systems that everybody kind of like, right? There's SAP, there's Oracle, right? There's a finite number of companies that offer ERP systems. And so I just can't, for the heck of me, can't figure out how you're going to get competitive advantage out of deploying the same system that everybody else has. The best you can achieve is parity, right? And so my view is that I think similar to you, right? You should take a really hard look at how the work gets done and get that right. And then you got to figure out where technology fits. And then that might be a question around, right? Where do we get off-the-shelf technology that does the job? Or where do we, maybe if we have the capacity and capability, right, can build something that's really unique and supports us, right? But maybe do that more in an app format and maybe with an expiration date, on the technology that says, we know this is only going to last for 2 years. It reminds me of Sony used to do that when they launched Walkmans, back in the back in the 80s, right? They would say, okay, right, this is like no matter how many, right, how many hundreds of thousands of Walkmans we're going to sell on December 31st, right, 1991, right, we're going to launch the new model, right? And I feel like why don't we just approach like a lot of these systems with the same mentality? And then maybe we wouldn't kind of make the roots go so deep, right? That we try to connect everything and kill ourselves trying to disentangle this, right? But I'm not a technologist, but I just see it. I see it's a rate limiting factor.
I think you're absolutely onto something because it's what happens. It's so entrenched 10 years down the road. Like if you had just set that limit and said, okay, every 2 years, doesn't matter. We're looking out there to upgrade this thing. We're just going to have that be something that we do and we get good at, right? We get good at switching it out.
Yeah, we wouldn't, right? We wouldn't invest and double down on band-aids because we know that 2 years from now it's gone, right? I think that's a really helpful way to look at it, right? But I understand that, obviously, right now we're in the age of AI, right? The temptation is just there to say, well, maybe instead of dealing with those pesky humanoids, maybe we can find a shortcut and get a piece of tech to do this for us. Although we've been disappointed for the last 30, 40 years, I guess it's just a tendency. I want to go back to the book. I think it's a wonderful book. Everybody should have this on their bookshelf. Where can people find it?
You can find it anywhere probably that you find books. Like you can get it on Amazon. What was the other one? There's a Barnes and Nobles. Yeah, anyway, anywhere you can find books, you can find them. You can find it online.
And if people want to learn a little bit more before they dig in, I would imagine that you have a website that they could go to.
Yes, if you find me on elisabethswan.com, but use an S instead of a Z. Also, when you look the book up on any of the online sites, use an S in Elisabeth and Swan, but elisabethswan.com, just SWAN, just like the bird. And that's where you'll find more about the book. Or it's got a preview. You can go on Amazon and see a preview, sort of get a peek at what you were talking about, Thomas, that you can see how these short little chapters are just a little learnable nugget. You can do it there.
Yeah, I think they're addictive. I mean, you get 50 of them, right? So, right, maybe right one a week, right, would last you a year. But I found that they're so bite-sized, right? They're like chips, you know. You end up like reading 10 of them, and then you have to stop yourself, right? So they're really good. Listen, Elisabeth, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on what leaders can do to really build like their leadership and change management capabilities. Again, I think it's a wonderful book. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure, Thomas. I love your podcast. It's a pleasure being on.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, be sure to subscribe, like, share, or comment. Until next time, let's make work matter.